FlintTalkRadio.com. I'm George Moss, the host of the program, and we are delighted as always to have you out there in the listenership and viewership at the number one podcast studio in Genesee County, the state of Michigan, and soon to be throughout the universe. And those persons out there, E.T. and others, you will be able to tune us in also. We're going to have an intergalactic viewership. We'll see how that works out. I'm taping this program ahead of time because we didn't want you to miss out on what we do here at FlintTalkRadio.com from 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock normally, but we're going to be doing some 30-minute segments because I'll be away from the studio for a period of time just because I'll be in Africa during that time. So I'm going to be doing some 30-minute segments so that we will stay abreast of what's going on from the vantage point of the studio and what we're doing here. And we're trying to tape ahead of ourselves so that we can do something that will still be current when this broadcast will in fact air. And I'm going to be doing some generic discussions that will not be going away anytime soon because it is in the political arena and they have not yet resolved it. And they're not going to resolve it by the time we get back.
I got one past you. You're going to Africa, and you've usually used those times to actually do more research in the field of Africana history. No, it's Africana history, right?
It's Africana history.
Okay, so I don't know if you've seen recently on Facebook, people posted a thing. It's a picture of a man. It's a white person in shackles, and it talks about the slavery that occurred during different times, but actually prior to the slave trade of Africa. And a lot of people. I think one college professor. He's a friend of a friend. He's also a friend of mine on Facebook. He teaches over on the west side of the state. He actually posted several links, people could go to actually read about how this is actually verifiable in historical narrative. That might be an interesting thing for me to address too. The idea of slavery being seen like that we're taught this in school. It's basically they make it try to seem like it was solely upon the African Americans.
Yeah, that's such a false narrative. There's a book out, by the way. It's called White Gold, G-O-L-D. We talk about black gold, and we're talking about oil. We could also be talking about the Black Mother, which was Vassar Davidson's book before he changed it to the African slave trade, which is correctly named because what Davidson was saying in that book was that even the African slave trade, where the slaves were brought across the Atlantic Ocean on European ships. He is actually saying, even in that particular slave trade, that slave trade was driven by those on the African continent. It was not driven by Europe. Europe was the intermediary group between the two aspects of slavery, with Europe on the receiving end, in the colonists, and in the traveling end, but on the continent itself, the people in the African continent, who were not called Africans at that time. That would be a term that would be created out of the colonial period between 1884 to 1935, where you now have this idea of Africa as a continental unit, which was something that would be out of the European gaze. And I'll give you page 95 of the book written by Alan Missouri to document that, a book that's called The Africans. But there's a book out called it's called White Gold. And what he's talking about is the slave trade of whites that went on even in North Africa. So we sometimes will say the word slave means it comes from the word Slav, and we're right in saying that, which shows you the more universal aspect of slavery. But we don't want to just limit it to that concept of slavery because it would limit slavery to places like Yugoslavia. You got the word Slav in that name, and other names that have Czechoslovakia. You see Slav in that name as well, and we will relate it to Eastern Europe, but we'll miss out on the fact that there's slavery that of whites or Europeans, as we would call them as a continental group, to be consistent with Africans. And we have to be consistent with that concept. We have to therefore say Europeans. So don't limit European enslavement to Europe, because there's also enslavement of Europeans as a racial but not ethnic derivation, because you say whites, you're being generic in terms of including Irish and Italians and Germans, you name it, Spanish, and other such groups. Germans include that group as well. And it hides, even in saying that, by saying, well, the word slaves come from the word Slav. You're right in saying that, but what that hides is that there were European slaves in Africa, northern Africa. You had European slaves on the continent of Africa. And White Gold does a very good job of documenting that. You can see some pictures of it, as a matter of fact, in the 3-volume work by J.E. Rogers, Joel A. Rogers, who was a non-Orthodox historian, who had multiple volume books he put out, one of which was the books called Sex and Race, which is different from the book that was put out in a 1-volume work called Sex and Racism, which is another book on something else. But J.E. Rogers' book was on history, and he wrote it in 3 volumes. The one that would be unique to this integration of slavery in Africa would be volume 1, and I think it's also volume 2 as well, where you go into Europe with this, with slavery on both sides of the racial divide, because slavery wasn't racial at that point. This idea of racism had not yet been born, because Europe, unlike the rest of the world that had practiced slavery, wanted to justify slavery within the context of its religious tenets. Of course, there's no religion except Islam in Europe today, pretty much, because Christianity is pretty much out of there, and Europe has become secular. But when it was a religiously inclined continent, before the secularization has occurred in most of it right now, particularly in Western Europe, although you can have, you certainly are not going to be over in Europe understanding what's happening on the continent right now with Islam growing itself on the continent of Europe. But they had to justify, how do you have slavery and you have Christianity, where there is the tenets of the brotherhood of man, and I would assume we understand that would be also to say the sisterhood of women, and the two genders being in accord with each other, with each of their human qualities being respected by the way in which society operates. Well, you can't do that if you are, well, you can do it, but you cannot do it in a justifiable way if you're practicing something different from the idea that all men are created equal, all men, and I would include women, have certain rights, among which are life, liberty, and property, although they changed that later on because they decided they didn't want to give up the property, and they said the pursuit of happiness, which is a change in the language that Jefferson wrote, which will allow them then to keep the property as property owners. That's the government, because we don't own the property in this country as quite as has been kept. And even slavery was a property of the state. This idea of the individual owners of the slaves hides the fact that the government was in fact running the slave trade. But the main point I'm making here, since it was a segue into this conversation, which I'm glad to be able to have, is that the slavery was universal, but the race comes into it when you could in fact distinguish the population of slaves, one from the slave owner, from those who were owned. Once you can make that distinction, which you could not make prior to the slavery going on outside of particular land spaces, where one constituent group would be there in that land space, but in another continent, the persons would look different. Well, the slavery then would have a different rationale that could be used for it. You couldn't say race was the driving force in Europe when you had slavery, or the driving force in Africa when slavery was going on, because all the persons were the same group. And that's something I think we miss when we start using these words like African American and don't realize how generic a term that is. Just like slavery was universal and generic, everybody practices, so it's really generic and not specific to any particular group. But when you say African American, anybody that's in Africa then, born on the continent, meaning whites as well, would be African. And if they come to America and set down roots in this country, then they are African American, which wouldn't have anything to do with them being black. So these are conversations that we have not had yet, that we need to have in order to grow our understanding of what it is we're talking about. And when I go to Africa, which would be, I won't tell you exactly the dates because, that would be a security issue, not what people is watching the program normally, but maybe somebody tunes in, find out he's not there, and then decide that my TV set can now come out my windows. And I have to be honest with you, I would not be a happy camper because I just bought a flat screen that I put down in the basement because I want to watch the boxing so I can see all the blows. I can't see it on that small screen I have. So
no soccer. Did you read the bizarre comment that Ann Coulter?
I did read her comments.
Do you? I mean, okay. To me, sports are an enigma anyway. But she's saying basically it's a downward slide. And we see Americans watching soccer, and I went, soccer. If you want an actual physical game, it's far more physical than American football is, and it's more demanding, challenging. Mm-hmm. They don't have all the protection. I think it's more of a manly sport. But to say it's decadence, I could say it's like showing that there's probably a huge increase of maybe an influence from Europe, and there's might come along with that some other questionable things. But the blame should see soccer as a sign of further decay. I think is just extremist.
Yeah, John, I can be the mediator here between that view. Your view is a legitimate view. But I want to see what Ann Coulter is saying too, because Ann Coulter's point of view is consistent with what is said in the book by Mark Stein, America Alone. He takes exception to a comment made by Hutton that said that America should be more like the rest of the world. And what Stein is arguing is Ann Coulter's point of view, that the world is being the way it is why the world is in the turmoil that it is. And that the world is a much better place when the world is being more like America is. Not that we want to go over there and say, okay, you got to be this culture there, but you know what? We are the ones in the West that founded capitalism, and the problem in the world and poverty in the world is because others are not practicing it. What Coulter is getting at is that our being involved in soccer, now people are watching it like they're watching the NBA basketball. She's saying that this is a sign of decadence. Now, what does she mean by that? Because it's giving up the idea of that which makes us unique. That's not the intention of what we're doing with watching soccer, but that is one of the undefined and unrecognized consequences of the behavior, because in doing that, we're becoming more like the rest of the world. And the question is, do we, at the time when we see the turmoil in the world, do we need to be doing that, or do we need to be playing the kind of leadership roles we played in the world when the world was being normalized around some views and values that were being exported to other parts of the world, was made better as a result of that? I think that has some credence also, although I do understand the other side of the coin.
Well, see, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this girl that, I don't know if you know, I know I never told you this story. There's a woman that I worked with at U of M. This was probably the early 90s, so it's about 20 years ago now. And she had a boyfriend who was from France. She had studied in France. She basically met this guy and became involved. And for one thing, he said he actually told her, and she was an American, born and raised in one of these suburbs of Flint, that he feared the Americans' influence. Another thing is that he said too, the French were so dismayed at the fact that they had this conference they had in Europe, and they invited all these people in, and all these scientists, and they were trying to push for the ban of fluorocarbons in the aerosol sprays, and they were just like mocking America because we didn't show up. Well, she even made the point, well, why would we show up? We banned them 15 years ago. And she was a 19, 20, 21-year-old girl. She knew the history. So everybody was like looking at Europe, the Europeans are saying, we're better because we're concerned about the environment, when American people have already did the necessary legislation to ban them in the United States 15 years previously. So, and other things too, like I always say, but people always think that there's a demarcation point, us against them. America's built on violence and bloodshed and exploitation of other people. And I'm sitting there, my mom's family is from Europe. I'm looking at, well, do you think everybody just packed their trash and got out because they wanted to see some new sights? No, because those things are pretty horrible at home. So, I mean, you guys are just so arrogant to believe, you go through all of Europe, pretty much any place in Europe, where you're standing, somebody was butchered on, somebody was enslaved on, somebody was exploited upon, every inch of that. It's a mass graveyard. So don't begin to tell me how much better Europeans are. In the World War II just ended, 60-some years ago? Now they're talking about American street violence, how bad it is. They had thousands of people killed in a couple of nights in different rioting and stuff like that. How many people killed during different, pogroms in Russia? But yet now they're so much better than we are. Well, it's bizarre.
Yeah, it is bizarre, and I think that what Ann Coulter is saying is that the world is not better off if we are imitating what the world does. That the world is better off, and we're better off also when we are playing a leadership role. Because of the unique circumstances of this country, that we are better off, the world is better off when they are being more like us. And that is a sign of decadence in the United States, that we have now changed the course of the American experience, where we are in the forefront of the things that are happening in the world, and we're now following the world in the footsteps that are set by others. And that is a lesser role we've assigned for ourselves, and she's using soccer as an indication of that, showing it as a point of the decadence that is much wider and larger than just the soccer itself, but plays out in that particular domain that we can visibly see that as a result of it. And the question really is answered, I think, by the film that's coming out in 2 days. That'll be Dinesh D'Souza's latest film, America, where he's raising the question I think that Ann Coulter is raising in another way. He's doing a continuation of his films that he's had out, raising the question of America's role in the world, in history, and even in present times. And he's asking the question in the film that's coming out on July the 2nd, and I'm going to be finding out what theater is playing here, because I would like to see it before the 4th of July. Hopefully it'll be playing somewhere in the state. If it is, I'll be going to whatever theater that is, wherever it is in the state. And he's raising the question, what would the world be like if there were no American processes in place throughout the world? And, it would not be as civilized, as safe, as advanced, as anything that's positive as it is right now. And what is being raised in Stein's book is pretty much the same thing. If America is more like the world, we don't pay most of the cost of running the UN. We don't. If we play the role the rest of the world plays, if there is a tsunami in the Philippines or in Sri Lanka, we don't have rescue of those persons over there.
And we responded quicker to those than to the people of Katrina. We did. Our government did. I mean, we back everybody else. We care more about other people than we do more our own people.
That's right.
I think that's a seriously stupid.
The world suffers. Is the point if we play any role in terms of following the lead of other nations? Because look at the role we play as being in the forefront of that which not only affects the people. Sometimes we go to the rescue of the world at the expense of our own people. I agree 1,000% that goes on, and that should never happen.
Like, look at how many mass of people we sent. We had a war raging in Pacific Theater. We basically just did a maintenance program until we actually won the war in Europe for England and France and all those other countries, liberated them from the Nazis, and now there's so many years later, the French are turning around and demand de Gaulle, who has the gall to actually demand payments in gold for our trade imbalance with them. Yet we never requested once that they pay back the war debt they acquired with us.
That's right.
Britain never paid it back. The only country that did was Finland.
You're right. You're exactly right. That shows. I think that shows this other thing that is part of the decadence, not of America, but the decadence of our leadership. The charity of the American people is unquestioned anywhere around the world, and there is no group of people anywhere else on the planet that matches that. But the other side is that's disrespectful to the taxpayers by the politicians who want worldwide influence and pay for it by socializing the cost of it. None of it's coming out of their pockets. It's coming out of the taxpayers' pockets. And that's a little bit of decadence in our political leadership. But the country's charitable impulses, though, are second to none all over the world. There's nothing to compare it to.
It reminds me of a joke that I heard when I was a kid. The husband and wife was from a divorce court, and the judge heard the divorce proceedings and stuff, and so he said to the woman, he says, "I award you $200 a week and also extra money for their children." He brought down the gavel, and the husband goes, "Gee, thanks, Judge, and once in a while I'll kick in some money from my own pocket too."
Yeah, I think it's like that guy goes in the store to pay his bill. And he walks out wearing a barrel, and the barrel is being held by suspenders. And he tells the people outside who wonder what happened, he said, "Well, I'm just glad I don't have to pay the rest of it until Friday." He walked in with a whole suit of clothes, walked out after paying his bills wearing a barrel because they took all of his money. And that's sometimes the way you feel in America. I think that the charitable impulse should be more voluntary. Obviously, I don't think the government ought to be using force to bring it about. But the charitable impulse is what the American people would do just because of the kind of people they are. We're just charitable. And it's amazing how charitable we were before the government started donating money in our names for their political benefit. Because they're not satisfied with having power just in the bounds of the United States. They want to have influence worldwide. And that's a whole discussion about that too. But I just think that without America playing the dominant role and not one of leadership is a problem for the world. And for the U.S. to join in that which others are doing and begin to do it also as a Johnny-come-lately is not the role that has made us stand out from all the other countries around the world, and that's what Ann Coulter is talking about in terms of a certain amount of decadence involved in following the lead of other countries around the world. Because if you follow them in that particular domain, and you follow them in terms of the charity, then what does the world do? Because, let's face it, to be like them is to be mediocre in all these other ways. We are the leaders in innovation. I mean, I don't have a problem understanding why China tries to steal the secrets from the innovations in America. When you have the kind of freedom that allows for free flow innovation, comes out of the ability to be free in your thought process, you create. Because the creative spirit cannot be incubated in oppressive environments. That's why you don't see innovations coming out of these other parts of the world. I'm going to a couple of places I'm not going to see it ahead of time because I don't want some folks running ahead of me and getting on the plane and trying to blow me up. But I'll be in a lot of countries, and none of them are known for producing anything as an initial product. All of them are followers of that which is innovated elsewhere. And I'll be in one place, it'll be a very safe place, but I don't see anything that they've ever produced. I see them selling mangoes and things like that, but they're selling that which is on a tree. They didn't even plant the tree. That grows in the soil, and I don't know why I go to the market and buy it other than I'm trying to give people some money because they're trying to get their dinner for that day, because I can go to a mango tree right outside the place I rent for an apartment. But I think America has to play a role in terms of the leadership. And I do not want to get out of the program today without saying that racism had a reason for existing because of the philosophical tenets of the West that wasn't found anywhere else. They had to rationalize slavery where no other group on the planet had felt called upon to rationalize it. And that's why they had to have it incubated and continue to be practiced by claiming that there was something wrong with the group they were enslaving. That was a way of hiding the fact that there was a contradiction, which is the beginning of guilt, by the way. We often talk about Western guilt. Well, you know, nobody else around the world is feeling guilty about slavery. They all practice it. Only one group, only one part of the world feels guilty about the practice of slavery. I don't find any guilt in Gambia, and I'll be there. I'll say I will be there. I won't tell you the other places there because I got to go over there and duck because there's some violence going on in some of them, and then I got to watch the health issue in some because a couple of them are having this Ebola, I think they call it, breakout, and I've got to be very careful over there. I may be over there wearing a mask, but I've been inoculated, so I'll be able to hopefully get through some of the maze there.
There's a vaccine against Ebola?
Well, not a vaccine against that, but my risk, your immune system, if it's not up to speed, it can't ward off these other subsidiary diseases like that. And I try to build my immune system up so that when I get there, then other things don't. You see, the immune system is broken down. That allows other things to come into play within your body. Disease just means your body is not at ease with the environment that you're living in. It's diseased rather than being at ease. And so I'm trying to make my body be more healthy than normally, so that when I get into a diseased environment, that diseasedness will not in fact cause a breakdown in my immune system, which is what that really is about. Over there, the reason you see these epidemics is because the immune system is already broken down by the lack of nutrition in their diet and things of that sort. And that's why you see a lot of these things being incubated over in those quote-unquote third world countries where you see these breakouts of different things. But America needs to needs to stop apologizing for itself and continue to play the dominant role in the world, because look at how the world is and how much trouble the world is in because we backed up, and we had to back up quite frankly because we cannot finance the role we once played in the world. We don't need 175 military bases around the world. I agree with you on that. With those who are saying that we need to bring some of Ron Paul, I can agree with you on that. I don't buy the isolationist view as much as he does, but I do agree that that is unsustainable and should not ever been engaged in the first place. I do agree, and I agree for the reason that I see the peace that's in Japan. People may not be aware of this, but Japan has not lost one Japanese citizen in combat since World War II. In other words, no Japanese have died in intermilitary conflict since Nagasaki, which was August the 9th, 1945. Show me where that has occurred. They've been involved in no wars since 1945. And we were able to go in there, do our work, and get out of there. Now, I don't know why we have to have an army everywhere around the world. I'm not advocating that. What I'm saying is that our leadership, though, must be in the world, or the world, through our own mediocrity, becomes mediocre also. And that's what you're seeing in terms of this infusion of these terrorist groups. And we have to be honest about what's going on there. We have to be honest about that. Okay, well, we are, as you're listening to this program, we are now in Africa. We take this ahead of time, and we'll be doing some additional programs as well, so that we'll have 30-minute programs in the can, so that we'll be able to keep our program alive in front of the public until we get back. Until that time comes, until our next program is aired, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you will never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.